I was lying in the hospital bed counting the ceiling tiles when the anesthesiologist told me to count backward from 10. And the last thing I thought about was whether I'd locked the cabin door before leaving for my emergency gallbladder surgery. I made it to 7 before everything went black, completely unaware that while surgeons were cutting into me, the president of my homeowner association was breaking into my property in Asheville, North Carolina, and turning my private mountain retreat into an illegal rental operation. My name is Brian Patterson, and I'm a 52-year-old software consultant who'd spent the last 3 years renovating a beautiful log cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The property sat on 5 acres of pristine woodland, with a creek running through the back 40 and enough privacy that I could go days without seeing another human soul. That's exactly why I'd bought it. After my divorce 5 years ago, I needed a place that was mine alone, somewhere I could escape the chaos of my Charlotte condo and just breathe. The cabin wasn't part of any subdivision when I purchased it. The property had been grandfathered in, standing there since 1987, a full decade before some developer named Marcus Chen decided to build Mountain Vista Estates around it. I'd checked all the documentation with 3 different real estate attorneys before signing anything. My cabin was not part of the HOA. I had it in writing, recorded with the county, notarized and backed up in triplicate. But that hadn't stopped Sharon Whitfield, the HOA president, from trying to force me into their organization from day one. Sharon was every bit the stereotype you'd imagine. 58 years old with an aggressive blonde bob that she somehow maintained despite living in the mountains. Always wearing white capri pants and pastel sweaters like she was auditioning for a country club commercial. She drove a white Mercedes SUV with a bumper sticker that said, "Following HOA rules makes good neighbors," which she'd apparently had custom made. The woman had made it her personal mission to bring my cabin under HOA control, and I'd spent thousands in legal fees over 2 years fighting off her increasingly absurd claims that my property was somehow subject to their covenants. I'd won every single dispute. Every letter from her lawyer was met with a response from mine, and every time, the conclusion was the same. My property predated the HOA, was never part of the development, and I owed them absolutely nothing. Not dues, not compliance, not even basic courtesy after the way Sharon had treated me. The surgery had been sudden. I'd woken up at 3 in the morning 2 days earlier with pain so severe I thought I was having a heart attack. My son Marcus, who'd been staying with me in Charlotte while working on a federal case, had driven me to the emergency room himself. Marcus was 30 years old, whip-smart, and a federal prosecutor for the Western District of North Carolina. He'd made a name for himself prosecuting white-collar crime and public corruption, with a conviction rate that made defense attorneys nervous. "Dad, you're going to be fine," Marcus had said in the ER waiting room, his hand on my shoulder. He had my ex-wife's dark hair and serious eyes, but he'd gotten my stubborn jaw and my inability to let injustice slide. "It's a routine procedure. You'll be out in a few hours." "The cabin," I'd mumbled, still foggy with pain medication. "I left my laptop there and some documents for the Riverside project." "I'll drive up and get them tomorrow," Marcus promised. "You just focus on not dying, okay? The surgery went well, or so they told me." I woke up in recovery feeling like someone had inserted a hot poker into my abdomen and twisted it around for fun. The surgeon, Dr. Patel, explained that my gallbladder had been severely inflamed, and they'd removed it laparoscopically. I'd need to stay in the hospital for observation for at least 2 days, maybe 3, and then take it easy for a couple of weeks. I was drifting in and out of consciousness, pumped full of morphine and antibiotics, when Marcus came storming into my room the next afternoon. His face was red, his tie was loosened, and he was carrying his phone like he wanted to throw it through a wall. "Dad," he said, his voice tight with fury, "we have a serious problem." I blinked at him, trying to focus. "What happened?" "I drove up to the cabin this morning like I promised. When I got there, there was a family unloading suitcases from a rental car in your driveway. That penetrated the morphine fog." "What?" "A family from Ohio. They had a confirmation email showing they'd booked your cabin on Airbnb for a week, $575 per night." I tried to sit up, which was a mistake that sent lightning bolts of pain through my torso. "That's impossible. I don't have an Airbnb listing. You do now." Marcus pulled up something on his phone and showed me. There it was, my cabin, photographed from multiple angles with a description that made it sound like a luxury resort. "Welcome to Blue Ridge Paradise, a stunning mountain retreat in exclusive Mountain Vista Estates. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, hot tub, fire pit, and access to community amenities." "Community amenities," I gasped. "It's not even part of the community. It gets better." Marcus swiped to another screen. "The listing was created 2 weeks ago by an account registered to Mountain Vista Estates HOA. They've had 3 bookings already. This family from Ohio, another couple who checked out yesterday, and someone else scheduled for next week." My head was spinning, and not just from the drugs. "Sharon Whitfield listed my cabin on Airbnb, while you were in surgery, apparently. The Ohio family showed me their confirmation. Check-in was yesterday at 3 p.m. Someone met them there with keys, gave them a tour, and collected the payment through the Airbnb platform." "But how did they even get in?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Looks like they had keys made. There were scratches around the deadbolt, fresh ones." "I'm betting they hired a locksmith and spun some story about being locked out of their property." I felt rage cutting through the morphine haze. "She broke into my house. Breaking and entering, fraud, theft, identity theft, and probably a dozen other charges." Marcus started pacing. "I told the family they needed to leave immediately. They were not happy, started threatening to sue for ruining their vacation. I explained that they'd been scammed, that the listing was fraudulent, and that they should contact Airbnb for a refund and file a police report." "Did they leave?" "Eventually. The husband wanted to fight me on it, but I showed him my federal prosecutor credentials and explained very clearly that they were trespassing on private property. That convinced them." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "But Dad, we need to move fast. There's another booking starting in 4 days. And according to the Airbnb reviews, the couple who stayed there earlier this week left a glowing 5-star review about how clean and well-maintained everything was. Someone's been in my cabin, going through my things. Someone's been running it like a hotel." Marcus showed me photos he'd taken. "They restocked the kitchen, bought new linens, put little welcome baskets in each bedroom with local soap and coffee beans. The hot tub was freshly cleaned and running. They even put out fresh flowers." The violation of it hit me harder than the surgery pain. My private space, my sanctuary, turned into a rental property without my knowledge or consent. "We need to call the police." "Already did. Buncombe County Sheriff's Department is sending someone to take a report. But Dad, this is bigger than local police." Marcus pulled up a chair and sat down beside the bed. "This is wire fraud. They're conducting interstate commerce using fraudulent means. The Ohio family paid through Airbnb, which means electronic transfers across state lines. That's federal jurisdiction. You want to prosecute Sharon Whitfield? I want to crucify her." Marcus's voice was cold. "But I can't be the one to do it directly because you're my father, so there's a conflict of interest. However, I have colleagues who would be very interested in this case. and I can certainly make sure it lands on the right desk. A nurse came in to check my vitals, forcing us to pause the conversation. She adjusted my Roman 4, asked about my pain level, and reminded me that I needed to rest. Marcus waited until she left before continuing. I took extensive photos and videos of everything, he said. Documented the Airbnb listing before it could be taken down, got statements from the Ohio family, and collected the welcome basket as evidence. I also called a locksmith to change all your locks immediately, but we need to figure out how deep this goes. What do you mean? If they've been doing this for 2 weeks and had 3 bookings already, that means they've made thousands of dollars. Where's that money going? Is Sharon keeping it herself, or is it going into HOA accounts? Are other board members involved? How many people at the HOA knew about this? Those were good questions. The Mountain Vista Estates HOA had a 5-member board. Sharon as president, a vice president named Donald Marsh who was a retired accountant, a secretary named Patricia Henderson, a treasurer named Robert Kim, and a member-at-large named Jennifer Matthews. I dealt with all of them at various points during the boundary disputes, and they'd all backed Sharon's increasingly unhinged attempts to claim authority over my property. We need financial records, I said. Already requested them. I sent a formal letter to the HOA this morning, identifying myself as your legal representative and demanding all financial records related to rental income from your property, along with copies of any agreements, contracts, or authorizations they claim to have. Marcus smiled grimly. I gave them 72 hours to comply before I file a federal complaint. They're not going to hand those over willingly. Probably not. Which is why I also filed a police report with the sheriff's department and contacted the FBI field office in Asheville. I have a friend there, Agent Rebecca Torres, who specializes in real estate fraud. She's very interested. I closed my eyes, exhausted from the conversation and the pain. This is insane. Why would Sharon do this? Money, probably, or control. Maybe both. Marcus stood up. You need to rest. I'm going to head back to the cabin and make sure everything is secure with the new locks. I'm also going to stay there for the next few days to make sure nobody tries to access the property. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. This is my family they're messing with. His voice softened. Get some sleep, Dad. Let me handle this. After Marcus left, I lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, too angry to sleep despite the drugs. I kept thinking about strangers walking through my cabin, sleeping in my bed, using my dishes, sitting on my porch. The cabin was supposed to be my escape, my safe space, and Sharon had violated it in the most egregious way possible. The next morning, Dr. Patel cleared me to go home, though she insisted I needed to take it easy and avoid any stress. I almost laughed at that. Marcus picked me up and drove me back to my condo in Charlotte, helping me get settled with prescriptions and instructions to rest. I'm going back up to Asheville tomorrow, he said. The HOA has a board meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. I'm planning to attend. Are you allowed to do that? HOA meetings are supposed to be open to homeowners in most states, and North Carolina law requires them to allow property owners to attend. You're going to give me written authorization to represent you, and I'm going to exercise your right to attend and speak. Sharon's going to lose her mind. That's what I'm counting on. Marcus grinned. Angry people make mistakes, and I want her making mistakes on the record. The next day crawled by. I tried to rest, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Sharon and her cronies pawing through my belongings, making themselves at home in my space. Marcus called me at 6 p.m., right before the HOA meeting was scheduled to start. I'm here, he said. The meeting is at Sharon's house. There are about 15 people here, all homeowners from the subdivision. Be careful, always M. I'll call you after. The wait was torture. I sat in my recliner, unable to get comfortable, checking my phone every 30 seconds. Finally, at 8:30, Marcus called back. "Well, that was entertaining," he said. "What happened?" I showed up and introduced myself as your legal representative. Sharon tried to have me removed, claiming I wasn't a homeowner and had no right to be there. I cited North Carolina General Statute 47 F3 108, which allows property owners to designate representatives to attend HOA meetings. She tried to argue that you weren't actually a property owner in the subdivision, which was a huge mistake. Why? Because she just spent 2 weeks operating an Airbnb listing that explicitly advertised the cabin as part of Mountain Vista Estates with access to community amenities. I pointed out that she couldn't have it both ways. Either my father's property is part of the HOA, in which case I have every right to be there representing him, or it's not part of the HOA, in which case she's been running a fraudulent rental operation on property she has no authority over. I couldn't help but smile despite the pain. What did she say? She turned the color of a tomato and started sputtering. Then I formally requested the financial records I'd asked for in writing. She claimed they didn't have any records related to rental income from your property. So I pulled up the Airbnb listing on my phone and showed it to everyone in the room. You still had access to it, screenshots and archives. Always preserve evidence, Dad. You taught me that. Marcus sounded pleased with himself. The other homeowners were stunned. Nobody knew what Sharon had been doing. Donald Marsh, the vice president, started demanding answers. Patricia Henderson looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. The whole meeting devolved into chaos. Did Sharon admit anything? Not directly. She claimed it was a misunderstanding, and that she'd been trying to help generate revenue for the HOA by utilizing underused community resources. When I pointed out that my father's cabin wasn't a community resource and that she'd broken multiple laws, she ended the meeting and told everyone to leave. That's it, for now. But here's the thing, Dad. Donald Marsh pulled me aside afterward. He's the treasurer, and he said he'd never seen any rental income in the HOA accounts. If Sharon's been collecting money from these Airbnb bookings, she hasn't been reporting it to the board. That was embezzlement on top of everything else. So she's stealing from the HOA too. That's what it looks like. Donald said he's going to do a complete audit of the accounts and compare them to HOA bank statements. He also said he's calling for an emergency vote to remove Sharon from the board. Will they do it? I think so. The other homeowners were pretty angry when they found out what she'd been doing. Nobody wants legal liability for this mess. Marcus paused. Agent Torres called me tonight. She wants to interview you as soon as you're feeling up to it. I can do it tomorrow. I told her you'd say that. She'll meet us at your condo at 10 a.m. Agent Rebecca Torres turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She arrived at my condo exactly at 10, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a gray pantsuit that screamed federal agent. Marcus had driven down from Asheville that morning to be there for the interview. "Mr. Patterson, thank you for meeting with me," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "I know you're recovering from surgery. I'll try to keep this brief." We sat in my living room and I walked her through everything. The history of the property, the ongoing disputes with the HOA, the surgery, and Marcus's discovery of the Airbnb listing. Agent Torres took detailed notes and asked precise questions about timelines, financial amounts, and who might have had access to my property. "Do you have any idea how they obtained keys to your cabin?" she asked. "Marcus thinks they hired a locksmith and claimed they were locked out. We'll check with local locksmiths in the Asheville area. That could be conspiracy to commit breaking and entering. She flipped through her notes. Your son mentioned that the Airbnb account was registered to the HOA entity itself. That's important because it shows this wasn't just Sharon acting alone. Someone had to have access to the HOA's organizational documents to set up a business account. Could she have done that herself as president? Possibly, but she'd need an EIN number, articles of incorporation, and probably approval from the board. We'll subpoena Airbnb for their complete registration records. Agent Torres looked at Marcus. You said the vice president is conducting an audit, Donald Marsh. He's a retired CPA, used to work for one of the big four accounting firms. He's trustworthy, or at least he seemed genuinely shocked by all this. I'd like to speak with him. Can you arrange that? Already did. He's expecting your call. Marcus handed her a business card with Donald's information. Agent Torres spent another hour with us, going through every detail. She examined the photos Marcus had taken, reviewed the Airbnb listing screenshots, and collected the welcome basket as evidence. Before she left, she gave me her card and promised to keep us updated. Mr. Patterson, I want to be clear about something, she said at the door. This is now a federal investigation. That means you need to avoid any direct confrontation with Sharon Whitfield or other HOA board members. Don't contact them, don't threaten them, don't try to handle this yourself. Let us do our job. I understand. I mean it. Federal cases can be derailed by witness interference or vigilante justice. If Sharon or anyone from the HOA tries to contact you, refer them to your attorney and let us know immediately. After she left, Marcus made me lunch and helped me change the dressing on my surgical wounds. I was healing well physically, but the emotional violation of what Sharon had done was eating at me. How long does a federal investigation take? I asked. Depends on the complexity. This one seems fairly straightforward, but they'll need to gather financial records, interview witnesses, and build a solid case. Could be weeks, could be months. Marcus handed me a bottle of water. In the meantime, we need to deal with the civil side of things, meaning you should sue Sharon and the HOA for damages. Breaking and entering, conversion of property, fraud, emotional distress, legal fees. A good attorney could make a strong case. I'm tired of attorneys. I know, but this is different. This time you're not defending yourself against bogus claims. You're going on offense. Marcus sat down across from me. These people violated your home, Dad. They need to face consequences for that, both criminal and civil. He was right, of course. I'd spent 2 years playing defense, swatting away Sharon's ridiculous claims and spending money on lawyers to protect what was legally mine. Now I had the chance to make her answer for actual crimes. Fine. Find me a good civil attorney. Already have one in mind. Rachel Chen practices in Asheville, specializes in property law and HOA disputes. She's aggressive and she wins. Over the next week, I focused on recovering from surgery while Marcus coordinated with Agent Torres and set up meetings with Rachel Chen. The new attorney turned out to be exactly what I needed. A no-nonsense woman in her 30s who listened to my story, reviewed the evidence, and immediately started drafting a lawsuit. We're going for maximum damages, Rachel said during our first meeting at her Asheville office. Breaking and entering, trespass, conversion, fraud, violation of privacy, emotional distress, and punitive damages. I'm also filing for an immediate restraining order to prevent any HOA member from accessing your property. What about the money they made from the rentals? That's part of the conversion claim. Any money made from illegal use of your property belongs to you. We'll demand full accounting and restitution. Rachel pulled up a spreadsheet. Based on the Airbnb listing rates and the bookings we know about, They made at least $3,400. But if they started earlier than 2 weeks ago, it could be more. Donald Marsh is auditing the HOA accounts, Marcus said. He might find evidence of more bookings. Perfect. Get me those records as soon as he's done. Rachel made a note. I'm filing the lawsuit this week. The HOA will be served within days, and then we'll see how they respond. The lawsuit hit the HOA like a bomb. Rachel filed in Buncombe County Superior Court, naming Sharon Whitfield individually and the Mountain Vista Estates HOA as an entity. The complaint laid out every detail of their illegal activities, complete with photos, financial records, and witness statements. It was 37 pages of devastating legal accusations, and it asked for $250,000 in damages. Marcus called me the day after the HOA was served. Sharon's lawyer just filed a response. They're claiming qualified immunity because she was acting in her capacity as HOA president. That's absurd. Rachel thought they'd try something like that. She's already drafting a response explaining that qualified immunity doesn't apply to private HOA officials and certainly doesn't protect against criminal acts like breaking and entering. What about the restraining order? Granted. Judge issued a temporary restraining order preventing Sharon, the HOA board, or any agents working on their behalf from accessing your property. Violation could mean contempt of court. Things moved quickly after that. Donald Marsh completed his audit and discovered that Sharon had been running the Airbnb operation for 6 weeks, not 2. There had been 8 bookings total, generating over $12,000 in revenue. None of that money had been deposited into HOA accounts. Instead, Sharon had been collecting payments through the Airbnb platform and having them direct deposited into a personal bank account she'd set up specifically for this purpose. It gets better, Marcus told me over the phone. Donald found emails between Sharon and Patricia Henderson discussing the rental operation. Patricia knew about it. They were planning to expand it to other properties around the subdivision, creating a whole network of illegal rentals. How many other properties? At least 3 that they'd identified as good candidates. All of them owned by people who didn't live there full time. They were going to break into multiple homes and turn them into secret Airbnbs. The scope of Sharon's criminal enterprise was staggering. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, ongoing fraud scheme that could have affected multiple property owners. Agent Torres's investigation accelerated. She obtained warrants for Sharon's financial records, email accounts, and phone records. The evidence was damning. Detailed plans for the rental operation, correspondence with locksmiths using false pretenses to obtain keys, conversations with Patricia Henderson about dividing profits, and attempts to intimidate homeowners who asked questions about HOA finances. 2 months after my surgery, Agent Torres called me with news. "Mr. Patterson, I wanted to give you a heads up before it becomes public. We're arresting Sharon Whitfield and Patricia Henderson tomorrow morning. They're being charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, breaking and entering, and identity theft." My heart raced. Actually arrested. Federal indictment. They'll be arraigned in federal court in Asheville, and then we'll see if they make bail. Agent Torres sounded satisfied. The case is solid. We have financial records, emails, witness testimony, and physical evidence. The U.S. Attorney is confident about getting convictions. What about the other board members? Donald Marsh and Robert Kim are cooperating witnesses. They had no knowledge of the scheme and alerted authorities as soon as they learned about it. Jennifer Matthews claims she didn't know anything either, and we don't have evidence suggesting otherwise. It looks like this was just Sharon and Patricia. The arrests made local news. The Asheville Citizen-Times ran a front-page story about the HOA president and secretary being charged with running an illegal Airbnb operation using other people's properties. The story included details about my cabin, the federal investigation, and the ongoing civil lawsuit. Within hours, it was picked up by regional news outlets, and then national outlets started calling. Marcus handled most of the media requests, giving carefully worded statements that didn't jeopardize the criminal case. My father's property was illegally accessed and used for commercial purposes without his knowledge or consent while he was recovering from surgery. We're grateful to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office for taking these crimes seriously and pursuing justice. The story resonated. People were outraged that an HOA president would break into someone's home and rent it out while they were in the hospital. Social media exploded with angry comments about HOA overreach and calls for reform. Several national news shows reached out for interviews, and Rachel Chen advised me to do a few carefully selected appearances to build public support for the civil case. I did an interview with a local news station, sitting in my Charlotte condo and explaining what had happened. The reporter, a young woman named Jennifer Adams, asked pointed questions about HOA accountability and property rights. "How did you feel when you learned your cabin was being rented out without your permission?" she asked. "Violated," I said honestly. This was supposed to be my private sanctuary, and someone broke in and turned it into a business. It wasn't just about the money they stole. It was about the invasion of privacy, the complete disregard for boundaries and the law. What do you want people to understand about this case? That HOAs need oversight. They're given significant power over people's homes and lives, and when that power is abused, the consequences can be severe. Sharon Whitfield thought she was above the law because she was an HOA president. She thought she could do whatever she wanted with my property just because she didn't like that I wasn't under her control. The interview aired that evening and was shared thousands of times online. I started getting messages from other people who'd had nightmarish experiences with HOAs, stories of fines for minor violations, forced architectural changes, and power-drunk board members making their lives miserable. Sharon's arraignment was a media circus. She showed up in federal court wearing a conservative navy suit, her hair perfectly styled, looking more angry than remorseful. Patricia Henderson looked terrified, clutching her lawyer's arm as they walked through a crowd of reporters and cameras. Marcus attended the arraignment and called me afterward with updates. They both pled not guilty. Sharon's bail was set at $50,000, Patricia's at $25,000. The magistrate judge deemed them flight risks given the severity of the charges and the potential prison time. Will they make bail? Sharon already did. She posted it within an hour. Patricia is still trying to come up with the money. Marcus sounded frustrated. Sharon stood outside the courthouse and gave a statement claiming this is all a misunderstanding and that she was trying to help the HOA community. She's playing the victim card. Of course she is. Her lawyer is trying the case in the media, but it won't help. The evidence is overwhelming. The civil lawsuit moved forward in parallel with the criminal case. Rachel Chen was relentless, filing motion after motion, demanding discovery, and refusing to accept any of the HOA's attempts to delay or dismiss. The HOA's insurance company initially tried to deny coverage, claiming that Sharon's actions were outside the scope of her duties, but Rachel argued that the HOA itself was liable for failing to supervise and allowing the fraud to occur. 3 months after the arrests, we received stunning news. Patricia Henderson had decided to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. She provided detailed testimony about Sharon's planning and execution of the rental scheme, including evidence that Sharon had been considering expanding the operation to properties outside Mountain Vista Estates. Patricia is throwing Sharon under the bus, Marcus told me. She's claiming Sharon masterminded everything and pressured her into helping. Says Sharon convinced her they were providing a service to the community by generating revenue. Will prosecutors accept the deal? They already did. Patricia is pleading guilty to conspiracy charges and will testify against Sharon at trial. In exchange, she's looking at probation instead of prison time. Sharon's trial was scheduled for early spring. In the meantime, the civil case moved toward resolution. The HOA's insurance company finally agreed to settlement negotiations after realizing they couldn't win at trial. Rachel Chen negotiated aggressively, refusing to accept lowball offers and insisting on full accountability. They're offering $75,000 to settle, Rachel told me during a conference call. That covers your actual damages, lost rental income, legal fees, and some additional compensation for emotional distress. What do you think? I think we could get more at trial, but trials are unpredictable. $75,000 is solid compensation, and it includes an admission of wrongdoing from the HOA. Rachel paused. There's also a provision requiring the HOA to implement new oversight procedures, mandatory audits, and board member training. It's not just about the money. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Take the settlement. We finalized the agreement 2 weeks later. The HOA paid $75,000, issued a public apology, and agreed to implement comprehensive reforms. Donald Marsh was elected as the new HOA president, and one of his first acts was to pass a board resolution formally acknowledging that my cabin was not part of Mountain Vista Estates, and that the HOA had no authority over my property. Sharon's criminal trial began on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. The federal courthouse in Asheville was packed with reporters, legal observers, and curious members of the public who'd followed the case. Marcus took time off from work to attend, and I went with him despite my lingering anxiety about facing Sharon in person. The trial lasted 5 days. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Financial records showing Sharon had pocketed over $12,000. Emails detailing her plans to expand the illegal rental operation, testimony from the Ohio family who'd been scammed, statements from locksmiths who'd been lied to about being locked out, and damning testimony from Patricia Henderson about Sharon's role as the mastermind. Sharon's defense tried to argue that she'd believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president, and that she'd intended to eventually turn over the money to the HOA. The jury didn't buy it. After just 4 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts: wire fraud, conspiracy, breaking and entering, and identity theft. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. I submitted a victim impact statement through the U.S. Attorney's Office, describing how Sharon's actions had violated my sense of security and privacy. I explained that I still felt uncomfortable staying at the cabin alone, that I'd installed a comprehensive security system with cameras and alarms, and that the place that was supposed to be my sanctuary now felt tainted. On sentencing day, I sat in the courtroom gallery as Judge Michael Richardson reviewed the sentencing report and heard arguments from both sides. The prosecution asked for a significant prison sentence, arguing that Sharon had engaged in a calculated criminal enterprise and shown no remorse. Sharon's attorney begged for leniency, claiming she was a pillar of the community who'd made a terrible mistake. Judge Richardson was not sympathetic. "Mrs. Whitfield, you held a position of trust as president of your homeowner association. Instead of honoring that trust, you engaged in a deliberate, ongoing criminal scheme that victimized innocent people. You broke into Mr. Patterson's home while he was in the hospital recovering from surgery. You stole from him, violated his privacy, and attempted to profit from your crimes. Your actions represent a betrayal of everything an HOA president should stand for." He sentenced Sharon to 30 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay restitution of $12,000 to me and fines of $25,000. When the sentence was announced, Sharon's face went white. She'd clearly expected probation, or at most a few months in a minimum security facility. 30 months was a real prison sentence. Patricia Henderson received her sentence the same day: 1 year of probation, community service, and a $5,000 fine. The difference in outcomes showed the value of cooperation with investigators. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. Justice had been served. Sharon was going to prison. I'd received financial compensation, and my property rights had been vindicated. But none of it erased what had happened. The cabin had been violated, and that sense of violation lingered. "You okay?" Marcus asked as we drove back toward Charlotte. "I think so. It's just weird. This whole thing started because I was in surgery, and now it's ending with Sharon going to prison. She did it to herself, Dad. Every choice, every crime that was on her. I know. I just keep thinking about how obsessed she was with controlling my property. All those legal letters, all those boundary disputes, and when she couldn't win legitimately, she broke the law." I stared out the window at the mountain scenery. What drives someone to that? Pride, arrogance, the belief that rules don't apply to you. Marcus glanced at me. "You going to keep the cabin?" That was the question I'd been wrestling with for months. Part of me wanted to sell it and walk away from all the bad memories. But another part of me refused to let Sharon win, even from prison. The cabin was mine. I'd earned it, renovated it, and built my dream retreat there. I wasn't going to let her take that from me. "Yeah," I said, "I'm keeping it, but I'm making some changes." Over the next few months, I transformed the cabin's security. I installed a state-of-the-art alarm system with motion sensors, glass break detectors, and cameras covering every entrance. I upgraded all the locks to smart locks that sent me alerts whenever they were accessed. I had the locksmith install commercial-grade deadbolts that would be nearly impossible to pick or bump. I also started spending more time there, refusing to let fear keep me away from my own property. Marcus came up on weekends sometimes, and slowly the cabin started feeling like mine again, instead of like a crime scene. The Mountain Vista Estates HOA underwent significant changes as well. Donald Marsh implemented quarterly audits, required dual signatures on all financial transactions, and created a community oversight committee to review board decisions. Several longtime board members resigned, embarrassed by their association with Sharon's crimes. New members were elected, people who understood that the HOA's role was to maintain common areas and enforce reasonable rules, not to control every aspect of residents' lives. Donald reached out to me about 6 months after Sharon's sentencing. We met for coffee at a cafe in Asheville, and he apologized profusely for not catching Sharon's fraud earlier. "I should have been more vigilant," he said, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. "I was the treasurer. Financial oversight was literally my job." "She was careful," I said. She kept it off the books and used a separate account. You couldn't have known. Still, the warning signs were there. Her obsession with your property, the way she shut down questions about finances, the secretiveness. Donald shook his head. I'm just glad Marcus caught it when he did. If it had gone on much longer, who knows how many other properties she would have targeted. Have you had any other issues with the HOA since taking over as president? Nothing major. A few disputes about fence heights and paint colors, the usual stuff. But nothing like the nightmare Sharon created. He hesitated. I want you to know that the new board has formally recorded a declaration with the county confirming that your property is not part of Mountain Vista Estates and that we have no authority over it. It's official and legally binding. I appreciate that. It's the least we can do. Sharon caused you so much trouble and then committed actual crimes against you. The HOA owes you a debt we can never fully repay. We talked for another hour about his plans for the HOA, his efforts to rebuild trust in the community, and his determination to make sure nothing like Sharon's fraud could ever happen again. It was a good conversation, and I left feeling like maybe, finally, the nightmare was truly over. Marcus's career continued to flourish. His work on my case, while tangential to his official duties, had garnered positive attention from his supervisors. He was promoted to senior trial attorney and given more high-profile cases. We grew closer through the ordeal, our relationship strengthened by fighting together against injustice. A year after Sharon's sentencing, I was sitting on the cabin porch watching the sunset when my phone rang. It was Agent Torres. "Mr. Patterson, I wanted to give you an update," she said. "Sharon Whitfield is being released early for good behavior. She served 20 months of her 30-month sentence and will be on supervised release for the next 3 years. My stomach tightened. Is she coming back to Asheville? She's not allowed within 500 feet of your property as a condition of her supervised release. She's also prohibited from holding any position of authority in an HOA or similar organization. If she violates those conditions, she goes right back to prison." "Where is she going?" "Moving to Florida, apparently. Staying with family in Tampa. She's not allowed to leave the state without permission from her probation officer." After hanging up, I sat on the porch for a long time, processing the information. Sharon was free, or as free as someone on federal supervised release could be. Part of me was angry that she hadn't served her full sentence, but mostly I just felt relief that she was moving far away and wouldn't be part of my life anymore. The cabin was peaceful around me. Birds called from the trees, the creek babbled in the background, and the mountain air was clean and cool. This was what I'd wanted when I bought the place: solitude, beauty, and escape from the chaos of the world. Sharon had tried to take that from me, but she'd failed. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. "Hey, you free this weekend? Want to come up to the cabin? I'm thinking about grilling steaks and maybe doing some fishing." "Sounds perfect, Dad. I'll be there Saturday morning." 2 years after the trial, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I worked my consulting jobs, spent weekends at the cabin, and enjoyed a peace I hadn't felt during the years of fighting with Sharon. The legal bills were paid off with the settlement money. My health had fully recovered from the surgery, and I'd even started dating someone I'd met through a hiking group. The Mountain Vista Estates HOA thrived under new leadership. Donald Marsh served 2 terms as president before stepping down, having transformed it into a model of transparent governance and reasonable administration. Property values in the subdivision increased, and the community developed a reputation for being well-managed and welcoming. I occasionally ran into HOA members at local businesses in Asheville, and the interactions were always friendly. The shadow of Sharon's crimes had faded, replaced by a shared understanding that we'd all learned important lessons about accountability and oversight. My cabin remained my sanctuary. I'd finally moved past the violation of what Sharon had done, and the space felt truly mine again. The security system stayed in place, but more as a precaution than a necessity. I trusted the locks. I trusted my neighbors in the surrounding area. And most importantly, I trusted that the systems were now in place to prevent another Sharon Whitfield from abusing power. Marcus continued to visit regularly, sometimes bringing his girlfriend, a public defender named Sarah who kept him humble with her sharp wit and different perspective on the criminal justice system. They'd talk about cases over dinner, arguing good-naturedly about prosecutorial discretion and defense strategies, while I grilled fish and enjoyed watching my son be happy. One Saturday evening, Marcus and I were sitting on the porch after Sarah had gone to bed, sharing a bottle of bourbon and watching the stars emerge over the mountains. "You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't driven up here when I did?" Marcus asked. "If I hadn't caught the Ohio family that day, all the time," I admitted. "Sharon would have kept renting it out, making money, and I would never have known until something went wrong. Maybe a guest would have damaged something, or maybe she would have expanded to other properties like she planned." The locksmith told Agent Torres that Sharon had contacted him about 3 other properties. She was building a whole empire of illegal rentals. What stopped her from doing the others? Timing. She just started with your cabin when you had your surgery. She was testing the process, working out the logistics. If it had gone well for a few more weeks, she would have moved on to the next property. Marcus swirled his bourbon. "You got lucky in a weird way. The surgery happening when it did meant I checked on the cabin and caught her early." "Lucky isn't the word I'd use." "Fair enough, but it could have been worse. A lot worse." We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the forest. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. The creek provided a constant backdrop of white noise. "I'm proud of you, you know," I said suddenly. "The way you handled everything, the investigation, the trial, supporting me through all of it. You didn't have to get as involved as you did." "Yes, I did. You're my father. Someone hurt you, violated your space, and broke the law. I wasn't going to let that slide." Marcus looked at me. "You taught me that justice matters, that standing up for what's right is worth the effort even when it's hard. I was just applying the lessons you gave me." That moment, sitting on the porch with my son, sharing bourbon and watching the stars, felt like the true resolution of everything that had happened. Sharon had gone to prison. I'd received compensation, and the systems had changed to prevent future abuse. But the real victory was this. My relationship with Marcus had grown stronger. My love for the cabin had been restored, and I'd learned that standing up to bullies and criminals, no matter how exhausting and expensive, was always worth it. The legal battle had cost me thousands in attorney fees even with the settlement, months of stress and anxiety, and a permanent wariness about HOAs that I'd never fully shake. But I'd won. My property rights had been vindicated. A criminal had been brought to justice, and positive changes had been implemented to protect others. Sharon Whitfield had thought she was above the law because she had a title and a bit of power over a homeowner association. She'd thought she could violate my property and privacy without consequences. She'd been spectacularly wrong, and the 30 months she'd spent in federal prison had hammered that lesson home. Sometimes I wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience, or if she was still convinced she'd been in the right and had simply been caught. From what Agent Torres had told me, Sharon had never expressed genuine remorse, only anger at being prosecuted. That kind of narcissism probably never changes, but that wasn't my problem anymore. Sharon was in Florida, under supervised release, and explicitly prohibited from ever serving in an HOA again. She'd built her identity around controlling other people's properties, and now she was legally barred from doing so. That seemed like poetic justice. The cabin lights glowed warmly behind us as Marcus and I finished our bourbon and headed inside. Tomorrow we'd go fishing in the creek and maybe grill some of whatever we caught. Sarah would sleep in because she'd been working brutal hours at the public defender's office. The day would be simple and peaceful, exactly what the cabin was meant to provide. As I locked up for the night, checking the security system out of habit, I felt grateful. Grateful for Marcus's quick action and legal expertise. Grateful for Agent Torres's thorough investigation. Grateful for Rachel Chen's aggressive representation. And grateful for the community members like Donald Marsh, who'd stepped up to fix the problems Sharon had created. Most of all, I was grateful that I'd never backed down. I could have given in to Sharon's demands years ago, could have just joined the HOA to avoid the hassle, could have let her bully me into submission. But I'd stood my ground on principle, knowing I was right, and that foundation of being right had made all the difference when the real crimes occurred. The lesson, if there was one, was simple. Know your rights, document everything, and never assume that people in positions of authority are acting legally or ethically. Sharon had counted on me being passive, on nobody questioning her actions, on her title as HOA president providing cover for her crimes. She'd miscalculated on every front. And when she'd chosen to commit those crimes while I was in surgery, she'd sealed her fate by enraging my son, a federal prosecutor who had the knowledge, resources, and determination to make sure she faced the full consequences of her actions. 3 years later, I sold the cabin. Not because of Sharon or the memories of what she'd done, but because I was ready for a new chapter. I'd met someone special, a woman named Teresa Novak, who shared my love of the mountains but preferred the coast. We bought a beach house in the Outer Banks together, a place with no HOA at all, just open sand and ocean breezes. Marcus and Sarah got married in a small ceremony at the cabin before I sold it, a way of reclaiming the space and filling it with happy memories. It was a beautiful wedding, with about 40 guests, string lights hanging from the trees, and vows exchanged on the porch where Marcus and I had shared so many conversations. The new owners of the cabin were a young couple from Charlotte, both teachers, who fell in love with the property and promised to take care of it. I gave them the full history, including what had happened with Sharon, and they appreciated the transparency. They kept the security system and actually seemed excited about having all the protections in place. On the day I handed over the keys, I walked through the cabin one last time, remembering the years of renovation work, the quiet weekends alone, the stress of the HOA battles, and the ultimate victory over Sharon's criminal enterprise. The cabin had been good to me, had given me exactly what I needed when I needed it, and now it was time to let it go. Teresa was waiting in the car, ready to drive to our new beach house and start our new life together. Marcus had helped me move the last of my belongings the week before, and everything was already settled in our new place. As we drove away from Asheville, I felt at peace. The cabin chapter was closed, Sharon was long gone, and the future looked bright. I'd fought for my rights, won decisively, and come out stronger on the other side. Not everyone can say that about their HOA disputes. The beach house had been standing for 60 years, built well before any development companies started buying up coastal property and creating subdivisions. There was no HOA, no board members, no covenants or restrictions beyond basic county zoning laws. I'd learned my lesson about buying property that might be subject to association control, and I'd made absolutely certain this new place was free and clear. Teresa and I settled into coastal life easily. The sound of waves replaced the sound of the mountain creek, and seabirds replaced owls, but the sense of peace and privacy remained. I still did consulting work remotely, but I'd cut back my hours and was thinking about full retirement. Marcus visited often, sometimes with Sarah, sometimes alone when she was buried in trial preparation. We'd sit on the beach deck much like we'd sat on the cabin porch, talking about life, cases, and the future. He and Sarah were thinking about starting a family, and the thought of being a grandfather filled me with unexpected joy. One evening, about 6 months after we'd moved to the coast, Marcus called with interesting news. "Dad, you're not going to believe this. Remember Patricia Henderson? Sharon's accomplice. How could I forget? She reached out to Agent Torres asking if she could contact you. She wants to apologize in person." I was quiet for a moment, processing. Why now? It's been years. Part of her probation included counseling and restitution. Apparently, she's been working with a therapist on accountability and making amends. Torres said Patricia seemed genuine, but obviously it's completely up to you whether you want to meet with her. I talked it over with Teresa that night. Part of me had no interest in revisiting that painful chapter of my life, but another part was curious. Patricia had cooperated with the investigation and testified against Sharon. She'd accepted responsibility for her role, however coerced it might have been. What would you get out of meeting her? Teresa asked. I don't know. Closure, maybe, or just understanding. I never really knew why she went along with Sharon's scheme. Then maybe it's worth hearing her out, but only if you're comfortable with it. I agreed to meet Patricia at a coffee shop in Wilmington, neutral territory far from Asheville and the memories tied to that place. Marcus offered to come with me, but I declined. This felt like something I needed to do alone. Patricia looked older and more worn down than I remembered. Her hair had gone gray, and there were deep lines around her eyes. She stood up nervously when I walked in, clutching a coffee cup with both hands. "Mr. Patterson, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know I don't deserve your time." We sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then Patricia took a deep breath and started talking. "I want to apologize for my role in what happened to your cabin. I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway because I was afraid of Sharon." She looked down at her coffee. "That's not an excuse. I'm a grown woman who made terrible choices. But I want you to understand that I've spent the last 3 years trying to become someone better." "Why did you go along with it?" I asked. "Sharon had a way of making you feel like you were either with her or against her. She controlled everything in the HOA, and I was afraid if I didn't help her, she'd push me out or make my life difficult." Patricia's voice shook. "When she first suggested renting out your cabin, I told her it was illegal. She said it was creative revenue generation and that you'd never know. She made it sound almost reasonable. Reasonable. Breaking into someone's home and renting it out. I know. I know how insane that sounds, but Sharon had this way of twisting things, of making you doubt your own judgment." By the time I realized how serious the crimes were, I was already implicated. Patricia finally looked up at me. "I should have gone to the police immediately. I should have refused to participate. I should have done 100 things differently. I didn't, and I'm deeply sorry." We talked for almost an hour. Patricia told me about her probation, her community service at a homeless shelter, her therapy sessions where she was working on setting boundaries and standing up to manipulative people. She'd lost friends over the scandal, and her reputation in the community was destroyed. She was rebuilding her life slowly, working as a bookkeeper for a small business and trying to make amends where possible. I didn't forgive her, not exactly. What she'd done was too serious for that. But I appreciated the apology and the evident work she'd done to understand her mistakes. When we parted ways, I felt like I'd gained something valuable, the knowledge that at least one person involved in the crime had genuinely learned from it and was trying to be better. Sharon, on the other hand, never apologized or showed remorse. According to Agent Torres, who I kept in occasional contact with, Sharon had completed her supervised release in Florida and immediately moved back to North Carolina. She was living in Raleigh and had started a consulting business advising HOAs on management practices, carefully structuring it to avoid violating the terms of her conviction that prohibited her from holding board positions. The irony of Sharon profiting off HOA consultation after committing federal crimes against a homeowner wasn't lost on anyone. Marcus looked into whether she was violating any conditions of her release, but technically, she wasn't serving on any boards, just providing paid advice. It was slimy but legal. Some people never learn, Marcus said when he told me about Sharon's new business. She's still obsessed with HOAs and control, just finding ways to do it that won't land her back in prison. As long as she stays away from me and my property, I don't care what she does. And she did stay away. Whether out of fear of violating her supervised release conditions, simple geography, or because she'd finally learned that lesson, Sharon never contacted me or came near my beach house. She was part of my past, a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and criminal narcissism, but not part of my present or future. Life on the coast was good. Teresa and I got married in a small ceremony on the beach, with Marcus as my best man and Sarah as one of Teresa's bridesmaids. We built a life filled with morning walks on the beach, afternoon reading sessions on the deck, and evenings watching the sunset over the ocean. I stayed in touch with Donald Marsh, who sent me occasional updates about Mountain Vista Estates. The HOA continued to thrive under responsible leadership, and the community had become a model for how associations should operate, transparently, fairly, and with respect for homeowners' rights. The cabin where everything happened had changed hands twice more, each time selling quickly because it was a beautiful property in a desirable location. The story of what Sharon had done became part of the property's history, but it didn't seem to scare buyers away. If anything, the comprehensive security system I'd installed made people feel safer. 5 years after Sharon's conviction, Marcus called with news that brought genuine closure. "Dad, Sharon's dead." I sat down heavily. "What happened?" "Heart attack." She collapsed at an HOA conference in Charlotte. Paramedics tried to revive her, but she was pronounced dead at the hospital. Marcus paused. "I thought you should know." I felt an unexpected wave of sadness, not for Sharon specifically, but for the waste of it all. She'd had power and authority in her community, could have used it to help people, and instead she'd broken laws, violated trust, and ended up in prison. And for what? $12,000 and an ego trip. "That's sad," I said finally. "I mean, she was a criminal who hurt people, but still." "What a waste of a life." "Patricia called me," Marcus said. "She wanted to know if you'd heard. She seemed genuinely upset about it. Patricia actually changed. Sharon never did." "No, she didn't. And now she never will." That night, Teresa and I walked on the beach and talked about Sharon, forgiveness, and how people choose to use whatever power they have. I wasn't glad she was dead, but I couldn't pretend to mourn her either. Mostly, I felt grateful that chapter was permanently closed. The experience with Sharon and the HOA had taught me valuable lessons about property rights, the importance of documentation, and the dangers of unchecked authority. It had also shown me the importance of standing up for principle, even when it's expensive and exhausting. But more than anything, it had brought Marcus and me closer together. Fighting that battle side by side, watching him use his legal expertise to protect his father and pursue justice, and seeing him grow into a man who wouldn't tolerate bullies or criminals regardless of their title or position. Those were gifts that came from adversity. As I write this now, sitting on my deck overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, I'm grateful for how things turned out. The cabin sale money and the HOA settlement had funded my retirement and this beautiful beach house. Marcus had become a senior federal prosecutor with an impressive track record. Teresa and I had built a wonderful life together. And Sharon's crimes had led to reforms that protected other homeowners from similar abuse. The story that started with me counting backward from 10 before emergency surgery and ended with a federal conviction and years of legal battles was finally, truly over. My property was mine. My rights had been vindicated. Justice had been served. And I was living peacefully in a beautiful place with someone I loved. Sometimes people ask me about the whole ordeal when they hear I was the victim in that high-profile HOA fraud case. I tell them the truth. It was horrible and stressful and expensive, but fighting back was worth it. Not just for me, but for every homeowner who's ever felt powerless against an abusive HOA. And when people ask what they should do if their HOA is overstepping, I give them the same advice. Know your rights, document everything, get a good lawyer, and don't back down if you're in the right. Sometimes standing up to bullies costs money and time and energy. But the alternative is living under their thumb forever, and that's no way to live. The sun is setting over the ocean now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Teresa is making dinner in the kitchen, and Marcus and Sarah are driving down tomorrow to spend the weekend. Life is peaceful, and the battles are behind me. Sharon Whitfield tried to take my sanctuary from me while I was in surgery, tried to profit from violating my home and privacy, and ultimately paid a steep price for those crimes. She spent time in federal prison, lost her reputation, and died still clinging to the HOA world that had been her obsession. I moved on, found new happiness, and learned that sometimes the worst violations can lead to the best outcomes if you're willing to fight for what's right. My son is a federal prosecutor, and that fact turned out to matter more than Sharon ever could have imagined when she broke into my cabin and listed it on Airbnb. Justice was served. Life went on, and in the end, the good guys won.